Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/supportbuddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group where we study the words of the Buddha. We're in Volume 3, chapters 61 through 70. We study 10 chapters each week. Students are typically reading these chapters prior to class, then coming to class to study them in a study group, and then ask any questions that you'd like related to the actual teachings. We will typically start this class with a brief meditation to prepare the mind for the class ahead, but considering the chapters that we're studying today, I'm going to leave that part off and just go right into actually studying the chapters so that we can read the chapter. I will share some teachings on that and then open up to any questions that you might have. You can ask questions by putting those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. In the comment section, I'll be able to see those. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So I'm really pleased that you've decided to join, and we'll go ahead and start moving into the actual class and studying the individual chapters, starting with chapter 61. So I will go ahead and read the chapters unless there's somebody in Zoom who decides they would like to help out with reading. So chapter 61, this one is titled The Preservation of Truth. But Master Gotama, in what way is there the preservation of truth? How does one preserve truth? We ask Master Gotama about the preservation of truth. If a person has confidence, student, he preserves truth when he says, "My confidence is thus," but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion, "Only this is true. Anything else is wrong." If a person approves of something, student, he preserves truth when he says, "My approval of something is thus," but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion, "Only this is true. Anything else is wrong." If he receives an oral tradition, student, he preserves truth when he says, "My receiving of the oral tradition is thus," but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion, "Only this is true. Anything else is wrong." If he reaches a conclusion based on reasoned reflection, student, he preserves truth when he says, "My reaching of a conclusion based on reasoned reflection is thus," but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion, "Only this is true. Anything else is wrong." If he gains a reflective understanding of a view, he preserves truth when he says, "My reflective understanding of a view is thus," but he does not yet come to the definite conclusion, "Only this is true. Anything else is wrong." In this way too, student, there is the preservation of truth. In this way he preserves truth. In this way we describe the preservation of truth. But as yet, there is no discovery of truth. Okay, so we have 3 individual chapters that we're going to study here at the beginning of class that are all about coming to the final conclusion of truth. There's the preservation of truth, the discovery of truth, and then the final conclusion of actually acquiring truth. Because in order to get to enlightenment, an individual needs to be able to learn, reflect, to independently verify the truth, and then to practice in order to see the truth and gain wisdom to understand these natural laws of existence. Nothing in the Buddha's teachings is based on belief. So if someone is just believing and they don't understand how to preserve truth, discover truth, and come to the final conclusion of truth, they wouldn't be able to actually acquire wisdom to move the mind to enlightenment. So these 3 chapters are going to help you to understand this. So the preservation of truth here, what the Buddha is essentially talking about is somebody who's speaking from their own experiences. And here, someone hasn't actually acquired definitive truth yet. They just know truth based on their own experiences. They haven't yet discovered truth, and they haven't come to the final conclusion of what truth is. So here, the Buddha is describing that if a person has confidence, he preserves truth when he says, "My confidence is thus." So in other words, my experience is this, or from my opinion, or from my view. When you speak in this way about things, then you're preserving truth. It may not be the final truth, it might not be ultimate truth, but it is at least a truth in terms of what you've been exposed to and what your opinion is. Where oftentimes in conversations, when someone might be speaking, they might be speaking in definitive language as if something is true, but they haven't actually preserved truth, discovered truth, and come to the final conclusion of truth. So the Buddha is giving you examples here of ways that you might start understanding certain truths, but you haven't come to a definitive conclusion yet of whether it is true or not. It's only that this thing that you've experienced, in your opinion or in your view, is true, and anything else is wrong. But you haven't yet opened up the mind to all the potential opportunities for you to discover the truth and actually come to the final conclusion of truth. So that's what he's describing here, is giving you various ways to help you understand that. And here he even gives you this one where he says, if he reaches a conclusion based on reasoned reflection, he preserves truth when he says, my reaching of conclusion based on reasoned reflection is thus. So he's helping you to see how to speak from your own understanding, your own experience, and what your own opinions are without being confrontational and claiming that what you know is 100% the truth. So when you speak in this way, it will actually help you to preserve the truth. So let's see if you guys have any questions on this particular chapter. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll be able to see it and then answer any questions that you might have. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions yet in YouTube. And let's take a look at Facebook. Hello everyone on YouTube and Facebook. I see you guys logged in there. I'm not seeing any questions there in Facebook either. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 62. And if there's anyone in Zoom who decides you would like to read, you're welcome to. Just let me know at any time. This one is titled The Discovery of Truth. But in what way, Master Gotama, is there the discovery of truth? In what way does one discover truth? We ask Master Gotama about the discovery of truth. Here, student, a monk may be living in dependence on some village or town. Then a householder or a householder's son goes to him and investigates him in regards to 3 kinds of states. In regard to states based on craving, greed, in regard to states on anger, hatred, in regard to states based on ignorance, delusion. Are there in this Venerable One any states based on craving, greed, such that, with his mind obsessed by those states, while not knowing, he might say, I know? Or, while not seeing, he might say, I see? Or, he might urge others to act in a way that would lead to their harm and discontentedness for a long time. As he investigates him, he comes to know there are no such states based on craving, greed in this Venerable One. The bodily behavior and the verbal behavior of this Venerable One are not those of one affected by craving, greed. And the teachings that this Venerable One teaches are profound, hard to see, and hard to understand, peaceful and superb, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. These teachings cannot easily be taught by one affected by craving, greed. When he has investigated him and has seen that he is purified from states based on craving, he next investigates him in regards to states based on anger, hate. Are there in this Venerable One any states based on anger, hate, such that, with his mind obsessed by those states, while not knowing he might say, I know, or while not seeing he might say, I see, or he might urge others to act in a way that would lead to their harm and discontentedness for a long time? As he investigates him, he comes to know there are no such states based on anger, hate in this Venerable One. The bodily behavior and the verbal behavior of this Venerable One are not those of one affected by hate, anger. And the teachings that this Venerable One teaches are profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and superb, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, and to be experienced by the wise. These teachings cannot easily be taught by one affected by hate, anger. When he has investigated him and has seen that he is purified from states based on anger, hate, he next investigates him in regards to states based on ignorance, delusion. Are there in this Venerable One any states based on ignorance, delusion, such that, with his mind obsessed by those states, while not knowing he might say, I know, or while not seeing he might say, I see, or he might urge others to act in a way that would lead to their harm and discontentedness for a long time? As he investigates him, he comes to know there are no such states based on ignorance, delusion, in this Venerable One. The bodily behavior and the verbal behavior of this Venerable One are not those of one affected by ignorance, delusion. And the teachings that this Venerable One teaches are profound, hard to see, and hard to understand, peaceful and superb, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. These teachings cannot easily be taught by one affected by ignorance, delusion. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a moment and explain what I've read so far, and then we'll go on from there. What the Buddha is describing here is he's describing, in order to discover the truth, you're going to need a teacher. You're going to need to go find somebody who understands the truth, and particularly somebody who's enlightened or very close to enlightenment, because it would be very challenging to learn and discover the truth about the path to enlightenment if someone wasn't actually enlightened. It would be like learning how to drive a car from somebody who's never driven a car before. But instead, you would like to learn how to drive a car from someone who has maybe 15 or 20 years of experience driving a car. Therefore, you'll be safe and you'll be able to learn the truth about how to drive a car. So here, the Buddha is describing an individual who's interested in discovering the truth, and one of the things they're going to go do is visit somebody who is known to potentially know the truth, and they're going to investigate them and kind of observe, are they affected by craving, anger, or ignorance? These are the three poisons, or the three unwholesome roots, because the Buddha describes here at each one of these paragraphs that these teachings cannot easily be taught by one affected by craving, greed. Because if somebody hasn't done the work themselves to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance, which if they eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance, the mind is enlightened. If they haven't done that work themselves, they wouldn't know how to teach other people how to do that work. They wouldn't have cultivated the wisdom that they need. And they would be so affected by their craving, anger, and ignorance, it would be very difficult to learn from that person, because they would have certain selfish desires. When those aren't getting fulfilled, their anger would arise. They would have a certain amount of ignorance or delusion or confusion, not knowing the actual teachings. So it would be utterly challenging to learn from that person. And as you see here, the Buddha says, while not knowing, the person says, I know. So in other words, they're lying and they're misleading you. Or while not seeing, they might say, I see. And they might urge others to act in a way that would lead to their harm and discontentedness for a long time. So this is what the Buddha is suggesting, is that you investigate an individual to see if they have craving, anger, and ignorance. You're not judging them. You're not looking down on them. You're not doing anything like that. But what you're doing is you're looking to make a wise decision. This is discernment. Because if you're going to invest time, effort, energy, and resources to learn the teachings of the Buddha, you would like to make sure you're doing so with somebody that you have confidence in, that is either enlightened or very close to enlightenment. Because otherwise, if you're learning another person's craving, anger, and ignorance, what they're teaching is coming through those pollutions of mind, then you're going to be taking on the craving, anger, and ignorance. So you would like to learn with somebody who's cleaned out this dirty window, so to speak, who has eliminated as much of this pollution as possible to either be enlightened and having eliminated it 100%, or be very, very close to it, that you can now be able to get the pure teachings to be able to discover the truth. So once you've investigated this person and you've discovered that you don't see any craving, anger, and ignorance, the Buddha is saying, when he has investigated him and has seen that he is purified from states based on ignorance and delusion, now the Buddha is explaining to you what to do. Once you find this teacher that you feel is either very close to enlightenment or enlightened because you don't see any craving, anger, and ignorance in the way that they conduct themselves, now the Buddha is saying, okay, this is what you do in order to discover the truth. 1, then you place confidence in him. Filled with confidence, he visits him and pays respect to him. Because you're going to need to respect your teacher, because your teacher shouldn't be wanting anything or expecting anything from you. So by you showing respect to that person, then this teacher is going to know that, okay, this student has a certain level of respect. Let me take the time, effort, energy, and resources that it's going to take to teach this person, because it takes a lot of work to teach an individual how to get to enlightenment. And that teacher doesn't want anything from you. They're not expecting anything from you. So you should at least show respect to this person, that they're willing to help you without any kind of expectation or wants from you whatsoever. Now, having paid respect to him, and of course this could be a her as well, the Buddha is talking to male ordained practitioners, so it's not just males that should be teachers, but we need female teachers in the world as well. So understand that you can insert other pronouns here as well, and I talk about this in the preface of this book. So having paid respect to him or her, he gives ear. When he gives ear, meaning you listen, right? You give ear, you're listening to the teachings. He hears the teachings, and then having heard the teachings, you memorize them. During the lifetime of the Buddha, you had to memorize his teachings, and you needed to remember them word for word, because they didn't have books that the teachings of the Buddha were written down in. So they remembered his teachings word for word, and they recited them every 2 weeks. That's how chanting came about. Nowadays, you don't necessarily have to remember the teachings word for word, but you do need to understand and retain and be able to recall the meaning of the teachings and the understanding of the teachings, because then you can actually apply them in your daily life. If you didn't memorize the teachings in terms of their understanding and how to apply them in the world, then you wouldn't have the wisdom that you need in order to apply them and actually experience the benefits. So you will need to memorize the understandings of the teachings and how to apply them in daily life. But in terms of the word for word, we have books and videos, podcasts, and things like that to capture them nowadays. But you'd still need to cultivate the meaning of these teachings and how to apply them in daily life. And examining the meaning of the teachings he has memorized when he examines their meaning. Right? So not only are you memorizing the teachings, but you're examining them, you're investigating them, trying to independently verify whether they're true or not. And that's where it leads to the next one. He gains a reflective understanding of those teachings when he has gained a reflective understanding of those teachings. So this is where you do the independent verification that these teachings are true. This is the reflection. So he's talked about the learning, because you're listening and you're memorizing and examining. He's starting to talk about now reflecting on these teachings and starting to independently verify them. And as you independently verify them, he's talking about enthusiasm springs up in the mind. when enthusiasm is sprung up in the mind, because you might start getting this motivation and enthusiasm. Oh my goodness, I have discovered the truth here. Craving, desire, attachment does cause discontentedness. It's not other people that are causing me to be angry. It's my own mind that's causing me to be angry. And oh my goodness, when I am bitter and argumentative and hostile, and I gossip and I slander and I put this stuff out into the world, yes, harm does come to me. So when you start learning the teachings of the Buddha about all the different things that he's teaching you, and you start seeing how true it is through this reflective understanding, you might experience this enthusiasm coming up in the mind, and you're going to need to restrain the mind and have a disciplined mind in this situation. So as you see this enthusiasm spring up, you need to apply your will, right? Having applied your will, you need to apply your will to actually practicing these teachings. You can't just learn them intellectually and get to enlightenment. You need to do the intellectual learning. You need to do the reflection to independently verify them to discover the truth. But then you need to apply your will and your effort and your energy towards moving them into practice, so that then you can actually transform the mind. Uprooting the pollution and getting that out of the mind is happening through your practice. You would need to learn, reflect, and practice. But if you were only learning or you were only reflecting, you wouldn't be able to transform the mind. It's when you move the teachings into practice that you're uprooting the pollutions and actually seeing the real results. He investigates thoroughly, and having investigated thoroughly, he applies effort and energy through purposeful striving. Determined to apply effort and energy through striving, he realizes the ultimate truth and sees it by penetrating it with wisdom. So this is where you do a certain amount of intellectual learning, you start reflecting on it, and you see like, hey, these teachings are probably pretty true. Like I can see how these are actually really true. But then as you purposefully strive, moving the teachings into practice, that's where you get to the ultimate truth and you discover the truth. And now you've got wisdom, and you know without a shadow of a doubt, it's unwise to kill. It's unwise to steal. It's unwise to have sexual misconduct. It's unwise to have lying and false speech. It's unwise to take substances that cause heedlessness. We could go right on down the line. It's unwise to be arrogant and boastful and prideful, right? It's unwise to be hateful and have hate and anger and all these other aspects of the mind, these certain pollutions of the mind. As you learn, reflect, and practice, you get to the point where, because of your striving to practice, you discover the truth, and you know with 100% certainty that what you've learned and what you're practicing is the truth, because you see it's working and improving the condition of the mind. Because discontentedness will gradually diminish, and then focus, concentration, clarity of mind, and memory will increase. And you will see that your personal and professional relationships will really blossom. So now the Buddha sums this up where he says, in this way, student, there is the discovery of truth. In this way, one discovers truth. In this way, we describe the discovery of truth. But as yet, there is no final arrival at truth. Okay, so you're just practicing the teachings at this point. So there's no final arrival at truth. That's what the next chapter is all about. So let me see what questions you guys have on this one before we move on to the next one. And remember, you can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll be able to see those and answer any questions that you might have. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 63, the final arrival at truth. But in what way, Master Gotama, is there the final arrival at truth? In what way does one finally arrive at truth? We ask Master Gotama about the final arrival at truth. The final arrival at truth, student, lies in the repetition, development, and cultivation of those same things. In this way, student, there is the final arrival at truth, or wisdom. In this way, one finally arrives at truth. In this way, we describe the final arrival at truth. So he's talking here about practice, 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 right? That's where you finally arrive at truth. There's the intellectual learning, there's the reflection that you're starting to independently verify. And then he left off on the last one where he's saying, okay, you're starting to put these teachings into practice at this point. But now to get to the final arrival of truth, you need this repetition, this development, this cultivation of those teachings to continuously practice them. And that's what's transforming the mind to uproot the pollution. And that's where you come to the final arrival at truth, because when you see the condition of the mind improving and you see the condition of your relationships improving and your life's improving, this is how you know, aha, I've discovered the truth. I've come to the final arrival at truth, right? So there's this preservation of truth, the discovery of truth, and then the final arrival. And that final arrival at truth, the indication for you that you've arrived to that truth is the improvement to the condition of your mind. Because the condition of your mind can improve if you haven't done all of these steps of learning, reflecting to independently verify, and then practice to uproot the pollution of the mind. As you uproot the pollution, that's where you have your confirmation that your mind has improved. This is how when somebody attains enlightenment, they know that they've attained enlightenment. They're not going to go out and tell everybody, because by that point they've eliminated any craving or conceit or anything like that. But an individual knows when they've attained enlightenment. This is why the Buddha knew that he had attained enlightenment, because his mind was peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, because he had this final arrival at truth. The Buddha sometimes calls this final knowledge. You will see him describe this in other parts of his teachings, where you arrive to final knowledge. In the Eightfold Path, this is the path to enlightenment. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you'll be practicing the Tenfold Path, which has 2 additional steps, which is called right wisdom and right liberation. These are 2 additional steps that you don't teach, you don't learn how to practice those, but through practicing the Eightfold Path, an individual is practicing right wisdom and right liberation. I described this in Volume 1, Chapter 5, about the Tenfold Path. There, the primary part of the chapter focuses on the Eightfold Path, but the last section of that chapter, I described right wisdom and right liberation to help you understand what those are, because you'll need to get to that final knowledge where you're practicing right wisdom, where you can describe the teachings with ease. Somebody who's attained enlightenment, they've deeply studied, they've deeply reflected, they've deeply practiced, they've come to the final arrival of truth, and they're now practicing right wisdom, where they can easily describe the teachings to anybody at any time, because their mind is just operating through those teachings all the time. It's almost like you've upgraded your operating system from an old operating system on a computer to a new operating system. The mind has now been upgraded to this new operating system and is practicing right wisdom, and one can describe the teachings with ease. And then what right liberation is, even though it's not talked about here, I'll just describe it for you for completeness. What this is the mind is actually liberated from discontentedness and no longer experiences any discontentedness. And there'll be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and you will not have experienced any anger or frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment, jealousy, even the slightest displeasure in the mind, the slightest little ickiness is eliminated from the mind. And it will have been multiple years that you will see that this has occurred and that you no longer experience this. And this will have been something that you've been working towards for multiple years, so you will know that you have arrived to enlightenment. It's not instantaneous, it's gradual. So you'll get sometimes a month or 3 or even 6 months where there won't be any discontentedness in the mind. And then, boom, you're going to get a little bit of discontentedness. And then you'll continue to work on that, right? So as you're leading up to enlightenment, you're going to still experience discontentedness, but you'll get these windows, these glimpses of what the enlightened mind is like. And then more and more, you will be experiencing the enlightened qualities as you expand your ability to now practice these teachings in all situations and in all relationships. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. Again, you can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll be able to see that and be able to answer any questions that you might have. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. Okay, so now we'll go to chapter 64. This one is titled 5 Future Dangers in the Way for Consideration. Monks, there are these 5 future dangers in the way of reflecting on which the diligent, dedicated, determined monk, forest gone, ought to live just to attain the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. What 5? 1. Take the case of a monk who reflects thus: I am now young, a mere youth, black-haired and endowed with the beauty of youth, in the prime of life, but there will come a time when old age shall touch this body. And when grown old and overcome by age, it is not easy to attend to the Buddha's teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then, when I am in that condition, I will reside at ease, even though I am old. This is the first future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside, diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. 2. Again he reflects, I have health and well-being, a good digestion, which is neither too cold nor too heated, but moderation and suitable for striving. But there will come a time when sickness shall touch this body, and sick and ill, it is not easy to attend to the Buddha's teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then, when I am in that condition, I will reside at ease, even though I am sick. This is the second future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. 3. Again he reflects, food is now plentiful, there has been a good harvest, and food is easy to get, and it is easy to keep oneself going by gathering. But there will come a time when there is famine, bad harvest, and difficulty in getting food, when it will be hard to keep oneself going by gathering. And in a time of famine, people will move to where there is plentiful food, and there one will dwell in living conditions that are congested and crowded. It is not easy to attend to the Buddhist teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then, when I am in that condition, I will reside at ease, even though food is not plentiful. This is the third future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. 4. Again he reflects, now men reside in friendly fellowship together, blending like milk and water, without disputes, but viewing each other with eyes of affection. But there will come a time of fear of robbers, and the people of the countryside will mount their vehicles and flee. Fear-stricken, men will move away to where there is safety, and there one will dwell in living conditions that are congested and crowded. It is not easy to attend to the Buddhist teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then, when I am in that condition, I will reside at ease, even in a time of fear. This is the fourth future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside, diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. 5. Moreover, monks, the monk reflects thus: now the community lives in friendly fellowship, together, finding comfort in one teaching. But the time will come when the community will be fractured, and when that happens, it is not easy to attend to the Buddha's teachings. It is not easy to retreat to the forest wilderness. Before that comes to me, unwished for, undesirable, disagreeable condition comes upon me, let me in advance arouse energy for the attainment of the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Then, when I am in that condition, I will reside at ease, even though the community is fractured. This is the 5th future danger to consider, which is enough for a monk to reside, diligent, dedicated, determined, for the attainment of the unattained. Monks, there are these 5 future dangers in the way to consider, which the diligent, dedicated, determined monk, far is gone, ought to live just to attain the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized. Okay, let me help you guys understand this. What the Buddha is describing is 5 things that can get in your way of learning and practicing these teachings in order to get to enlightenment. And it's all really based around impermanence. Because of impermanence, things will change. So during this particular time that the Buddha is giving this discourse, there were certain situations that existed that made it more readily available for people to get to enlightenment with his instruction and his guidance, and certain things that were available at that particular time. But then due to impermanence and certain changes, an individual is going to meet with certain obstacles or obstructions to their enlightenment. And it's really wise to think through these 5 future dangers and then take action so that these things don't sneak up on you and then hinder you and become an obstacle or obstruction of you getting to enlightenment. So the first thing he's talking about here is he's talking about youth. That when you're young, it's actually a better time to learn and practice these teachings. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn and practice them when you're older, but the younger you are to learn and practice these, the easier it'll be for you. If you haven't learned these teachings at all, and then you get into older age, it's much more challenging oftentimes if you've lost the capability of your mind to be able to take in information, learn it, and then transform the way you function in the world. Whereas if you've been kind of set in your ways for many, many decades, now by the time you're learning these teachings, it'll be much more challenging for the mind to absorb this content and then make changes in the way that your mind thinks and the way that it functions and the way that you conduct yourself in the world. So while you're young, at any time, you should be learning and practicing these teachings. I know my son, I started teaching him when he was 6 years old, but I really look at it as he was learning when he was in the womb of his mother, because she was meditating at that time. And even when he was an infant and a toddler, we were doing things to help him learn the teachings. So now being 10 years old, it's so much easier for him to learn these teachings because he hasn't taken on a whole lot of conditioning of the mind. Where once you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it's a lot more challenging. There's never a bad time to start learning. So if you are 80 and this is the first time you've come across these teachings, start learning, right? If you're 30, 40, 50, if you're just coming across these teachings or you've been learning them for a period of time and you haven't yet got to enlightenment, start learning, get dedicated to it. But if you are also a parent and you have children that are young and you can influence their ability to learn these at a young age, it will be very wise for you to introduce these teachings to them when they're at a young age, because it'll be much easier for them to learn and practice. And even you, if you're in your teens or your 20s right now and you're hearing this, this is an ideal time for you to learn these teachings. Whether your parents are actually learning these teachings or not, it doesn't matter. You can actually learn them and develop your practice, and then you'll find that the rest of your life you'll have such peacefulness. And that's what the Buddha is talking about with each one of these, that if you overcome these hurdles, that then the rest of your life will be that much more enjoyable and fulfilling. So the second one, he talks about health and well-being, because you're not going to always be healthy. So when you're young, the body tends to be healthy, and this is an easier time for you to learn and practice these teachings rather than struggling through the aches and pains and miseries of poor health. He's talking about food, because during the lifetime of the Buddha, it was very challenging to come across food. There was a lot of work that had to go into planting and harvesting food and even getting water. It was a multiple hour thing just to go to the well, pick up the water, bring it to your house, dump it, go back and get more. We have a lot of conveniences now where food and water isn't as difficult as it once was. But depending on your income, you might find that it is challenging to actually get food. So if you're noticing that you have ample supply of food, the Buddha is saying this is an ideal time because you don't have to worry about food. You can eat and fulfill the needs of the body while you're attending to learning and practicing the teachings. Then the fourth one, he's talking about the group of people, the community that is now friendly towards each other, residing in fellowship, that there's not disputes, that they're viewing each other with these eyes of affection. Because if you're in a community of people where it's fairly calm and fairly peaceful, but then what the Buddha is describing as impermanence is there may come a time where there's robbers or fear based on crime that is happening in the community, and people will run away and kind of be broken up from that communal affection, that communal time of coming together and supporting one another, because you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment by yourself. You're going to need other people around. You can't go out in the forest all by yourself without any guidance or any instruction or any kind of community and just attain enlightenment. A Buddha can do that. That's what Gotama Buddha did. But the average person can't do that. The last Buddha that the world is currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. So you're going to need to be part of a community. And the Buddha is describing here a community of people who are very kind and polite and gentle and warm and loving and respectful to each other, is essentially what he's describing. But there comes a time when fear permeates through the community and people break up and go in all these different directions. And then it's going to be very challenging to learn and practice at that time. And then the fifth one that he's describing is he's describing the community that he's guiding in the teachers that he's developed, essentially the ordained practitioners, that he says, okay, now the community, now that he's alive, they're all in fellowship, they're together, there's one teaching, his teachings that people understand. The community is not fractured and broken up, it's living in harmony essentially. But he knows, because he predicted this, that there would become a time when the community would break up and fracture. And that's what we see today. We see so many different brands and sects and different ways of looking at the teachings that people have really fractured. There isn't just one set of teachings anymore. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, he was delivering this set of teachings that people could rely on and have confidence in, that indeed this is what led to his enlightenment, so therefore it would lead to your enlightenment too. So during that time frame, he was encouraging people to, okay, learn and practice the teachings because there's this one set of teachings and we're all together in this fellowship. Because as time goes on, this community is going to break up and fracture. He knew that. And this is what we see 2,500 years later. So these are all things to consider, that you would like to overcome them and not allow them to be obstacles. And this last one that we're talking about here in terms of one set of teachings, this is what I'm basing the teachings that I share with you on, which is the words of the Buddha, his original teachings. So it's important to find comfort in this one set of teachings, the original words of the Buddha. And now you can understand what exactly leads to truth and what leads to that wisdom and leads to enlightenment. Like he was talking about preserving truth, discovering truth, and then the final arrival at truth. The way that you can best do that is by using the words of the Buddha. If you're not learning with the words of the Buddha, it would be utterly impossible for you to get to enlightenment, because there's been so many drastic changes that people have made because of this fracturing that he's talking about, that the path to enlightenment is mostly lost in most parts of the world. But there's places that are basing their guidance and their teachings and what they share on the words of the Buddha. In those places, you can find the original source teachings, and then you can be guided to getting to enlightenment because you're basing what you're learning, reflecting on, and practicing on the words of the Buddha, this one set of teachings. What questions do you guys have on this? Again, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move on to the next chapter. This is chapter 65. It's titled, When the Mind Becomes Sluggish. On an occasion, monks, when the mind becomes sluggish, it is untimely to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. For what reason? Because the mind is sluggish, monks, and it is difficult to arouse it with those things. Suppose, monks, a man wants to make a small fire flare up. If he throws wet grass, wet cow dung, and wet timber onto it, sprays it with water, and scatters soil over it, would he be able to make that small fire flare up? No, venerable sir. So too, monks, on an occasion when the mind becomes sluggish, it is untimely to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. For what reason? Because the mind is sluggish, monks, and it is difficult to arouse it with those things. On an occasion, monks, when the mind becomes sluggish, it is timely to develop the enlightenment factor of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. For what reason? Because the mind is sluggish, monks, and it is easy to arouse it with those things. Suppose, monks, a man wants to make a small fire flare up. If he throws dry grass, dry cow dung, and dry timber onto it, blows it, and does not scatter soil over it, would he be able to make the small fire flare up? Yes, venerable sir. So too, monks, on an occasion when the mind becomes sluggish, it is timely to develop the enlightenment factor of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. For what reason? Because the mind is sluggish, monks, and it is easy to arouse it with those things. Okay, so let me help you understand what the Buddha is describing here. The Buddha has various teachings, and all of these teachings are designed to help you bring the mind to the middle, to fine-tune it, to optimize it, to help you develop that focus, concentration, clarity of mind, and deep memory, and eliminate discontentedness. That's the whole goal of his teachings, is to help you eliminate discontentedness. But you're going to find that sometimes the mind is sluggish, and you're also going to find sometimes it's excited, which is the next chapter. But in this sluggish condition, you would like to arise the mind, bring it into this middle. So you need to arise certain qualities in the mind to bring it to the middle out of this sluggish, dull, lethargic, and complacent condition. And he's describing it as a fire, as if you want to arise this fire and bring it up. Well, if you're trying to get this fire to flare up, you're not going to throw wet grass, wet cow dung, and wet timber, spraying it with water and scattering it with soil. That's going to put the fire out. So here, this first part of what he's describing, which is the enlightenment factors of tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, those are what calms the mind down. That's what brings it out of the excited state down to the middle, where it can now be in the middle and practice the middle way, is the tranquility, concentration, equanimity. Well, if your mind is already sluggish, it's dull, it's lethargic, it's complacent, the last thing you're interested in doing is bringing in the tranquility, concentration, equanimity, because the mind is already kind of on the lower end of the spectrum. You're trying to lift it up and arise it, like you're trying to ignite this fire. So what the Buddha is describing here is the way that you would do that is you would practice the enlightenment factors of investigation, enlightenment factors of energy, and joy. This is what arises the mind out of that sluggish condition and brings it to the middle. This is like putting dry grass, dry cow dung, dry timber that you blow on it. that you don't scatter soil over it. This is what makes a small fire flare up. So if you have just a little bit of fire, your mind's pretty sluggish. With you practicing the enlightenment factor, investigation, energy, and joy, this is going to spring the mind and bring it to the middle. What investigation is to investigate his teachings. That's what you're doing right now. So if your mind tends to be in a sluggish or dull or lethargic state, the last thing the mind typically is interested in doing is picking up a book about the teachings of the Buddha, or watching a video, or listening to a podcast, or talking with your teacher, coming to class. Usually the mind's dull and lethargic. It just wants to sit around and be complacent. But you're trying to do just the opposite. You're trying to lift the mind up and arise this energy. So the enlightenment factor of investigation is what's going to help you to do that. And you need to apply the enlightenment factor of energy, which is a willingness to do something. This is the motivation, the enthusiasm, the initiative, that you're showing initiative to do something. And then this is where the enlightenment factor of joy arises. Because when your mind's sluggish, dull, lethargic, and complacent, the mind's not very joyful. It's just so sluggish, and it's like, oh my goodness, do I really have to go to work today? Or do I really need to go cook? Or do I really need to go wash those dishes? Oh, I just don't feel like it. So the Buddha is teaching you to arise this investigation, energy, and joy, because the mind can then be more joyful when it's in the middle rather than being in the sluggish condition. And the thing that's helping you to do all of this is mindfulness. That's one of the enlightenment factors. It's also in the Eightfold Path as part of right mindfulness. So if you have mindfulness or awareness of mind, you will be able to see and observe that the mind is sluggish, and then you'll know the solution, practicing the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy. And that's what I helped you see here in the part where I'm describing when you see the complacency, then you know what the remedy is, which is investigation, energy, and joy. And then we're going to see the opposite of that in the next chapter. But it's the mindfulness that is allowing you to accomplish all this. Without the awareness of mind, which you're cultivating and breathing mindfulness meditation, and you're practicing it in daily life, you wouldn't be able to see that the mind's complacent, dull, lethargic, or lacking motivation. You wouldn't be able to observe that. You would be unaware of that condition. But if you have the mindfulness that you've cultivated in meditation, and you observe that complacency, then you know the remedy. And I explain these enlightenment factors in Volume 1, Chapter 3, so you can see them in detail of describing which each one of these are and how to use them in a summary form. Questions on this particular chapter from anyone in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can put that in the comment section, or in Zoom you can raise your hand and let me know, or also put that in your comment section as well. Okay, it looks like we might have something here. Let me see, coming in on YouTube. This is from Max. Sir, YouTube seems to be cutting out quite a bit. I'm not sure if others are experiencing this as well. Yeah, I'm not sure. It could be the internet connection, Max, either on our side or your side. Right now it's a big Thai holiday. It's Sangran, which is the Thai New Year. So a lot of people are at home using the internet right now, so we might be competing for bandwidth. But I see you're in Zoom there, so that's good that it's working out for you. Okay, so this next question here in YouTube as well. What are the reasons for the dullness of the mind? This is because of craving, anger, and ignorance. As long as you're carrying around those pollutions of mind, and more specifically those 10 fetters, you're going to experience this dull, lethargic condition sometimes. Because the mind with craving, desire, attachment, it's longing, it's yearning, it's chasing after the objects of its affection. It's carrying around this burden to chase and chase and chase and chase and chase. And if it gets what it wants, it gets pleasant feelings. If it doesn't get what it wants, it gets painful feelings. So in certain days where you just feel like your day has been horrible and you're exhausted and you're worn out, this is because things didn't go your way that day. You didn't get what you wanted. All your cravings weren't getting fulfilled, so you didn't get those pleasant feelings. But when you go out the door and all your cravings are getting fulfilled, or a majority of them, and you're getting those pleasant feelings, and it feels like, wow, I just had such a great day. Well, the reason why you had such a great day is because all your cravings were getting fulfilled. But then in other days, your cravings aren't getting fulfilled, and it feels like a real drag. It feels like a real burden. You're exhausted at the end of your day. So if you train your mind to get rid of this pollution of craving, desire, attachment, which comes along with anger, hatred, ill will, and the ignorance and unknowing of true reality, every day can be a good day because you're not basing your inner feelings on some condition. As long as you're basing your inner feelings on some condition because of craving, desire, attachment, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. You're going to have bad moods, you're going to have good moods. But by the time you eliminate the craving, desire, attachment, not only are you not going to be having good days and bad days, you'll just be having all good days, but you won't feel that dullness, that lethargic, that complacency. But the way that you do that is when you observe that there is that dullness and complacency, that sluggish condition, you apply these factors of enlightenment, of investigation, energy, and joy, and you arise this in the mind and bring the mind to the middle. You're kind of fine-tuning the mind. Sometimes when people see the way this is titled, the 7 factors of enlightenment, they think that this is how to determine if somebody is enlightened or isn't enlightened. Well, an enlightened being will be practicing all 7 factors at all times, but that's not the only thing that determines if somebody is enlightened. So the 7 factors of enlightenment are actually tools to fine-tune your mind to bring it to enlightenment. It's not to determine if somebody is enlightened. It's actually tools that you use to bring the mind to enlightenment. So that sluggish, that dull, that lethargic condition is because of craving. That's the main aspect there. But of course, the only reason why craving exists is because of ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. Without that, craving wouldn't exist. So as long as the mind's polluted, it's going to be experiencing that dull, lethargic, complacent, and sluggish condition from time to time. Okay, great questions. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 66. This one is titled, When the Mind Becomes Excited. So this is going to be exactly the opposite of the chapter we just read. On an occasion, monks, when the mind becomes excited, it is untimely to develop the enlightenment factor of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. For what reason? Because the mind is excited, monks, and it is difficult to calm it down with those things. Suppose, monks, a man wants to extinguish a great bonfire. If he throws dry grass, dry cow dung, and dry timber onto it, blows on it, and does not scatter soil over it, would he be able to extinguish that great bonfire? No, venerable sir. So too, monks, on an occasion when the mind becomes excited, it is untimely to develop the enlightenment factor of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, and the enlightenment factor of joy. For what reason? Because the mind is excited, monks, and it is difficult to calm it down with those things. On an occasion, monks, when the mind becomes excited, it is timely to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. For what reason? Because the mind is excited, monks, and it is easy to calm it down with those things. Suppose, monks, a man wants to extinguish a great bonfire. If he throws wet grass, wet cow dung, and wet timber into it, sprays it with water, and scatters soil over it, would he be able to extinguish that great bonfire? Yes, venerable sir. So too, monks, on an occasion when the mind becomes excited, it is timely to develop the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. For what reason? Because the mind is excited, monks, and it is easy to calm it down with those things. But mindfulness, monks, I say, is always useful. Okay, so here we're getting the other side of this, that now it's not just a small fire in the mind. That's the complacency, right? There's this bonfire, this raging fire in the mind, and now you're trying to calm it down. And he's saying, this isn't the time to apply investigation, energy, and joy, because that's what lifts the mind up out of the complacency. So that's not the right time to apply those three factors. Instead, if you would like to calm the mind down, what he's encouraging you to do is practice the enlightenment factors of tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. These are the enlightenment factors that are going to calm the mind down, because these are very calming. And again, you can see the details on these in Volume 1, Chapter 3, where I explain these. And you're going to need these to really fine-tune the mind. If you think about the unenlightened mind like a big hunk of wood, and you're trying to create a sculpture, when you're first starting on the path to enlightenment, you've got out like your axe, and you're chopping off big chunks of wood. You're chopping off wrong view, you're chopping off wrong intention, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, wrong effort, wrong mindfulness, and wrong concentration. You're chopping off these big hunks of wood, making drastic changes to your life practice. You're bringing in meditation and developing the 5 precepts, eliminating killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, the false speech, the substances that cause heedlessness. But as you're practicing more and more, and you're getting the mind refined, and you're moving through those jhanas, and you're getting into the stages of enlightenment, you're going to need these 7 factors of enlightenment to fine-tune the mind. This is like not using the axe to chop off big chunks of wood off of this piece of wood to make a wooden sculpture. This is like taking a scalpel or a little razor blade and going in and like putting the eyelashes on the piece of wood to sculpt out the little eyelashes and the creases in the skin. So that's what the 7 factors of enlightenment are doing. It's fine-tuning the mind in a very detailed way. And that's what you will need at different times in your practice. And you can learn what these are and then practice them as you need them. Whether the mind is sluggish, you're going to practice the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy. And if the mind is excited, you'll practice this tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And then, as the Buddha says, mindfulness is always useful. You need to always be practicing mindfulness every moment that you're awake. From the moment that your eyes start opening up in the morning, all day long, and even as you're dozing off to sleep. You can have thoughts that can come and invade you as you're waking up or as you're falling asleep. You can have unwholesome thoughts that can come invade you, and you would like to cut those off and let them go. Or you can have wholesome thoughts that are coming into the mind, and you would like to apply effort to support those, encourage those, and don't allow them to fade. So mindfulness is always useful, and you should always be practicing that. So where you see a feeling of great enthusiasm and eagerness, this happiness, excitement, elation, this thrill, this exhilaration, euphoria, that's the time to practice these more calming enlightenment factors, which is the remedy, the tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And then be sure to always be practicing mindfulness. So let me see what questions you guys have on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So we can move on to the next chapter. All right. So here, chapter 67. 4 developments of concentration. Monks, there are these 4 developments of concentration. What for? 1. There is a development of concentration that leads to residing peacefully in this very life. 2. There is a development of concentration that leads to obtaining wisdom and vision. 3. There is development of concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension. 4. There is a development of concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints. Those taints are those fetters or pollutions in the mind. Now the Buddha is going to give us details on each one. 1. In what, monks, is the development of concentration that leads to residing peacefully in this very life? Here he describes the jhanas, which in order to get to this, you would need to practice the Eightfold Path. So here he's describing the results of having practiced the Eightfold Path. He's not describing what you actually need to do in order to get to this concentration that leads to your peacefulness in this very life. He's describing the results of it, which is the jhanas. So if you learn and practice the Eightfold Path, that's what's going to lead to these jhanas that he's describing. Here, a monk distant from sense desires distant from unwholesome mental states, enters and resides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering, based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy. And with the subsiding of thinking and pondering, by gaining inner tranquility and oneness of mind, he enters and resides in the second jhana, which is without thinking and pondering, based in concentration, filled with excitement and joy. And with the fading away of excitement, remaining imperturbable, unable to be upset or excited, calm and serene. Mindful and clearly aware, he experiences in himself the joy of which the noble ones say, "Peaceful is he who resides with equanimity and mindfulness." He enters the third jhana, and having given up pleasure and pain, and with the fading away of former gladness and sadness, he enters and resides in the fourth jhana, which is beyond pleasure and pain, and purified by equanimity and mindfulness. This is called the development of concentration that leads to residing peacefully in this very life. 2. And what is the development of concentration that leads to obtaining wisdom and vision? Here, a monk attends to the perception of light. He focuses on the perception of day. Thus, as by day, so at night. As at night, so by day. Thus, with a mind that is open and uncovered, he develops a mind permeating, filled with brightness. This is the development of concentration that leads to obtaining wisdom and vision. Okay, let me explain this for you. I'm going to do each one as we go. Obtaining wisdom and vision, what this is going back to that learning, reflecting, and practicing. This is how you gain wisdom, what the Buddha was talking about, preserving truth, discovering truth, and getting to final truth or final wisdom. As you gain this wisdom of the natural laws of existence, namely the natural law of karma, you have cultivated wisdom. And now you have vision. You can see very clearly what's going on in the world, in your relationships, as people ask you for advice. You can just see very clearly what needs to happen in order to solve this particular challenge or this particular struggle or difficulty that someone's dealing with, because you've already worked through all of that. So the concentration that you need to develop in order to obtain wisdom and this ability to see things clearly is what the Buddha is describing here. And what he's talking about is understanding this perception of light, this perception of day. And as by day, so at night, as at night, so by day. Thus, a mind that is open and uncovered, he develops a mind permeating, filled with brightness. So this is where, like, if you're kind of disgruntled and, in a bad mood and just not feeling well, it's kind of like, you're kind of dragging, right? What you would like to do is use those factors of enlightenment to lift the mind up out of that. You would like to bring in the investigation, the energy, and the joy, because your mind isn't filled with brightness at this point. So if you're going around and you're saying good morning, good evening, hi, how are you? You're filling the mind with brightness. You can do this little by little as you go around in your day, whether it's at a cashier, at a convenience store, whether it's a gas station attendant, whether it's a person who delivers food at your house. You can maintain this brightness. You can uplift the mind and fill and permeate the mind with this brightness where you're saying, hello, how are you? Oh, thank you so much for bringing my pizza. I really appreciate that. How much is it? Oh, okay, great. Here you go. Is it possible for me to give you a tip? Oh, sure. Okay, great. Here's a tip. Thank you so much. If you choose to tip, right? Or if you're at the gas station attendant. Hello, how are you? Oh, yes. Can you please fill up the tank with diesel gas or whatever it is? And then when they're done, you might say, thank you. I appreciate your kind service. And then you move on, right? If you've got energy and you've got joy, you can have the mind permeating and filled with this brightness. And it doesn't mean you're in this excited state, but you're not in this dull, lethargic state either. Your mind is in the middle where there's this uplifting of the mind, and it just does it with ease. As you first start this, it's going to be a challenge to potentially uplift the mind and get it to that point. But if you're feeling dull and lethargic, you're not interested in the mind and continuing to dwell there. As long as you continue to leave the mind in that disgruntled, dull, lethargic, sluggish condition, then the mind's continuing to kind of build that wiring where it's going to stay in that complacency. It's going to get deeply rooted in that complacency. So where you see that occurring, you would like to cut that off and lift the mind up. If you have well-developed mindfulness, as soon as you see the mind going into that dull, lethargic condition, you can uplift the mind. Don't allow it to stay there, because the longer it stays there, the harder it is to get it out of that. So here, that's what the Buddha is describing, is maintaining that brightness, because that brightness is going to allow the mind to take in wisdom and now be able to have vision of these natural laws of existence. If your mind is in this dull, lethargic state, it's going to be very challenging for you to cultivate wisdom and have this vision. So there, by bringing the mind into this brightness, you can maintain your concentration that leads to obtaining wisdom and vision. 3. And what is the development of concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension? So mindfulness is this awareness of mind. And clear comprehension is being able to have concentration and clarity and being able to understand things as they are. So here's what the Buddha says. Here, a monk knows feelings as they arise, as they remain present, as they disappear. He knows perceptions as they arise, as they remain present, as they disappear. He knows thoughts as they arise, as they remain present, as they disappear. This is the development of concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension. So these are part of what the Buddha describes in the 5 aggregates and things that you need to be mindfully aware of and you need to have clear comprehension of. Because as your feelings are arising, you need to be aware of that. And if they're continuing to persist in the mind, remaining present, you need to be aware of that. And when they disappear, you need to be aware of that. Because if you can have this awareness of the feelings, now your mindfulness and your clear comprehension is starting to be developed, because you've got this concentration, this ability to see very clearly that the feelings have arisen, they're remaining present, and now they disappeared. And then the same thing with your perceptions. What a perception is your views and opinions about the world and your certain beliefs about people and situations and circumstances. There's going to be certain perceptions that the mind is clinging to in the unenlightened state. You might be clinging to things that are actually untruths. And you need to get to the point where you can see those perceptions arise, those perceptions remaining present, and they disappear. Because you would like to eliminate any kind of beliefs, views, or opinions that are falsely informed, that are misperceptions. You'll have certain truths by the time you get to enlightenment, that you'll know the truth. You won't be clinging to a perception, that you'll be able to see a perception arise, remain present, and then disappear. And then the same thing with your thoughts. He's saying you should be able to see when the thoughts arise, when they remain present, and when they disappear. Okay? So this is how you develop concentration that leads to mindfulness and clear comprehension. And then the last one here. And what is the development of concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints? This is the elimination of the 10 fetters, those pollutions of mind. This is what leads to enlightenment. This is the ultimate ideal development of concentration that you would ultimately like to get through. After you've developed those first 3, then you ultimately need to develop this one so that you have this type of concentration in the mind. Here, a monk resides reflecting on the arising, in the vanishing, in the 5 aggregates, subject to clinging. Such is form, such is origin, such its passing away, such is feeling, such its origin, such its passing away, such is perception, such its origin, such its passing away. Such are volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, such its origin, such its passing away. Such is consciousness, such its origin, such its passing away. This is the development of concentration that leads to the destruction of the taints. These are the 4 developments of concentration. So here the Buddha is describing the 5 aggregates, or at least your awareness of them, that you need to have concentration and be able to see these very clearly. He describes them in other teachings, and you need to become aware of those 5 aggregates. In volume 2 is where I first introduced the 5 aggregates and help you to see what those are. So we've already studied that in this program. If you haven't studied that yet, you can go back to volume 2 and learn the 5 aggregates, because there's this physical form, which you have this physical form. There are certain feelings that come into the mind. Then there's these certain perceptions, which is how the mind perceives the world and thinks about the world, certain beliefs and opinions. Then there's these volitional formations, which are choices and decisions that you make, either wise or unwise. And those choices and decisions are leading to some result, either wholesome karma, if it's wise decisions, or unwholesome karma, if they're unwise decisions. And then there's the consciousness, which is the mind itself. And you would need to be able to observe all 5 of these aggregates, be able to know the origin of them and the passing away, and essentially the letting go of these 5 aggregates. So this is what he's describing that leads to the destruction of the taints, because this is how you're going to be able to eliminate the fetters, is being able to observe these things, know their origin, and know how to eliminate them and have them pass away, essentially. What questions do you guys have on this chapter? You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom you can raise your hand electronically. Looks like we have a question here on on YouTube. The question is it easy to concentrate for a layperson who will have to encounter the endless problems of life? I don't say that anything about the teachings of the Buddha is easy, but it's not difficult either. You can develop your mind and cultivate the mind to have this concentration. You're just going to need to have the inner discipline and the commitment to learning and growing. So yes, you can cultivate this. You're going to be in the world just like an ordained practitioner. So an ordained practitioner is just essentially has the opportunity to devote a significant majority of their day to learning and practicing the teachings, if that's what they choose to do. Not every ordained practitioner chooses to do that. A household practitioner, you're going to have a significant portion of your day working towards acquiring an income so that you can meet the basic necessities of your life, like food, water, clothing, shelter, and medical care. But if you've got 8, 10, 12 hours of work, then that means you are probably going to be doing about 10, 15, 20 minutes of reading per day. And you're going to probably be doing 2 or 3 meditations a day and coming to class like this potentially on the weekends, right? So you're going to need to build in that inner discipline. So where you might want to go surf social media, or you might want to go out and run around and do this, that, or the other thing, or the mind wants to endlessly watch a bunch of TV programs or something like this, you'll need to have that dedication to let those things go and more focus on developing your practice through learning, reflecting, and practicing. Of course, you should still spend time with families and friends and go to work and have relationships. This is all part of your journey to enlightenment, but don't feel that you're somehow hindered because you're a household practitioner, that you can't get to enlightenment or that you can't develop this concentration, because you surely can. It's just that you need to organize your life such that you don't allow the mind to indulge in endless unbeneficial activities like just mindlessly surfing social media or binge watching certain TV programs or countless hours of listening to music or things like this. Oftentimes the mind, when it's experiencing painful feelings, it's going to want to indulge in things like entertainment in order to get the pleasant feelings. But this is part of the whole problem. So to unravel all this, you'll need to spend a certain portion of your time, probably on weekends and outside of your work hours, where you're able to dedicate to reading 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, and you're able to come to 1 or 2 classes per week, and then you're also doing your meditations. And then all that learning that you're doing, you're implementing it into your life when you go to work or when you spend time with your parents or your children or your life partner. See, an ordained practitioner, they do have certain advantages, but there's also certain disadvantages too, because they're living in a temple. They're pretty sheltered away from the ability to kind of test the mind and challenge the mind and put it in situations where it might potentially become discontent. So you have that ability to actively interrogate the mind, investigate the mind, challenge the mind, and test it. So I would use that to your advantage. If you decide to be ordained at some point, okay, wonderful, but you can still get to concentration and clarity and enlightenment as a household practitioner. Thank you for your question. Let's see, I don't see any other questions. So let's move on to the next chapter. Let's see, chapter 68. Develop concentration, first discourse. Monks, develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are. And what does he understand as it really is? He understands as it really is. This is discontentedness. He understands as it really is. This is the cause of discontentedness. He understands as it really is. This is the elimination of discontentedness. He understands as it really is. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Monks, develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand. This is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Okay, so in terms of developing concentration, and if that's what you're interested in doing, going back to that last question that we had, this is the first step. What the Buddha is talking about here is the Four Noble Truths, developing right view. You would need to understand this is discontentedness, understanding what that is, understanding the cause of it, understanding the elimination, and understanding the way forward. This is what I discuss in Volume 1, Chapter 4. If you haven't learned that yet, through the book series and through the classes that I teach, these are all recorded in videos and podcasts and in the book. You can go back and be sure that you learned this, because this is the real beginning of developing your concentration, is you need to establish right view, and you can do that through the Four Noble Truths. And I even have many videos now that are on the YouTube channel that you can learn these in 5-7 minutes for each individual one of these, where I spend 7, 8, 10 minutes just on the first Noble Truth, and the second and the third and the fourth. So you'll need to digest that content to understand the Four Noble Truths. This is discontentedness. That is the conditioned pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. This is the cause of discontentedness, craving, desire, attachment, the mental longing and strong eagerness, craving for things to be permanent, but yet you live in an impermanent world. This is the elimination of discontentedness. Well, if the cause of discontentedness is craving, desire, attachment, the elimination of discontentedness is to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. And you do that with breathing mindfulness meditation and practicing generosity. These are the two primary trainings that work to eliminate discontentedness from the mind. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. This is the Eightfold Path, 8 individual steps that you learn and you fine-tune using the words of the Buddha, practicing this in daily life, developing your life practice to the point where you now are able to fully practice the Eightfold Path in all situations. That's what's going to lead to the elimination of discontentedness. But you can get a thorough description and understanding of this by going to Volume 1, Chapter 4, and then digesting the online content, either videos or podcasts, around that particular chapter, Chapter 4. Any questions on this one? Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. So let's go to the next one, which is Chapter 69. Develop concentration, second discourse. Monks, develop concentration. A monk who is concentrated understands things as they really are. And what does he understand as it really is? The origin and passing away of form, the origin and passing away of feeling, the origin and passing away of perception, the origin and passing away of volitional formations, choices, decisions, the origin and passing away of consciousness. In what, monks, is the origin of form? In what is the origin of feeling? In what is the origin of perception? What is the origin of volitional formations, choices, and decisions? What is the origin of consciousness? Here, monks, one seeks excitement, one welcomes, one remains holding. And what is it that one seeks excitement in? What does one welcome? To what does one remain holding? One seeks excitement in form, welcomes it, remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in form is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. One seeks excitement in feeling, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in feeling is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. One seeks excitement in perception, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in perception is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. One seeks excitement in volitional formations, choices, decisions, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in volitional formations is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be, which is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. One seeks excitement in consciousness, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in consciousness is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. This, monks, is the origin of form. This is the origin of feeling. This is the origin of perception. This is the origin of volitional formations. This is the origin of consciousness. And what, monks, is the passing away of form? What is the passing away of feeling? What is the passing away of perception? What is the passing away of volitional formations, choices, decisions? What is the passing away of consciousness? Here, monks, one does not seek excitement. One does not welcome. One does not remain holding. And what is it that one does not seek excitement in? What doesn't one welcome? To what doesn't one remain holding? One does not seek excitement in form, does not welcome it, does not remain holding to it. As a consequence of this, excitement in form is eliminated. With the elimination of excitement comes elimination of clinging. With elimination of clinging, elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence comes the elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth comes the elimination of aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. Such is the elimination of the whole mass of discontentedness. So here the Buddha goes through feelings, he goes through perception, he goes through volitional formations, consciousness, and now he comes to the conclusion where he says, with the elimination of excitement comes the elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging, elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence comes the elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth comes elimination of aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. Such is the elimination of this whole mass of discontentedness. This, monks, is the passing away of form. This is the passing away of feeling. This is the passing away of perception. This is the passing away of volitional formations, choices, decisions. This is the passing away of consciousness. Okay, so he's honing in on the five aggregates here. in understanding what the five aggregates are, which you're going to need to understand those. Again, those are described in volume 2. I'm pretty sure it's chapter 7. You can see them there, that I describe what each one of those are. And that chapter is the way that the Buddha describes the Four Noble Truths. You can see what each one of these five aggregates are: form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. And I described them just briefly earlier in this class. And then you can understand the origin of this. This is where the mind is seeking excitement, welcoming and holding on. So the mind is clinging to this physical form. The mind is clinging to the feelings, clinging to the perceptions, clinging to the volitional formations or choices and decisions, clinging to the consciousness or the mind. The mind is welcoming it, holding on to it, gaining this excitement or these pleasant feelings that, yes, I'm in existence. Oh, I'm born. I can indulge in all these sensual pleasures. Oh, this is so wonderful. Let me just indulge and cling to all of this stuff, right? And that's what leads to existence. That's what leads to birth. That's what leads to aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, and your whole massive amount of discontentedness, because the mind's clinging to these five aggregates. Then the Buddha is talking about the passing away. Well, how do you get rid of this, right? How do you let go of this clinging, where you don't seek excitement in the form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, or consciousness. So you need to train the mind to let this go and realize that, okay, I can make wise choices about the health of this physical body. I can brush my teeth, I can take showers, I can eat good food, maybe even do some exercise and other things like that, but I don't need to cling to this stuff. I can just make wise decisions to take care of this physical form. There are feelings that are going to come into the mind, but not clinging to those. Understand, like the Buddha was describing before about having mindfulness, like, oh, there's a feeling. Ah, now it's still there. Ah, now it's passing away. So having observance or mindfulness, awareness of the arising of feelings, the existence of them, and the fading away of them. And the same thing with perceptions and volitional formations. Not allowing the mind to cling to these things, the feelings, perceptions, or choices and decisions. Be willing to let these things go, and as well as the consciousness. Again, doing things that are helpful for the consciousness or the mind, like investigating the teachings, like meditating, by going for a nice walk with your friends or family, or going to do something enjoyable with your friends or family. You can do these kind of things, but don't cling to it, longing and yearning for it, because that's where the discontentedness is going to arise. Any questions on this particular chapter? Let's see, we have a question on YouTube. How to know that the mind is well concentrated? So you'll be able to see the focus and concentration. You won't have rambling speech. You won't have daydreams. You won't have where you're talking to a person and your mind is thinking about something else. If you have concentration, you'll be able to just talk very clear, very concise. You won't have a muddled mind. And when you're listening or talking to somebody, your mind won't be running away from you. It won't be thinking about something else. And you won't be having daydreams either, like where you're just sitting somewhere like, oh, I wish I could do this, or I wish I could do that. I don't like where I'm at, essentially, is what the mind's doing. It wants to be somewhere else. So when the mind's indulgent in daydreams, then it's not having clear comprehension and concentration. So you should notice this focus and concentration where you're able to be very clear and concise with your words. You don't have a muddled mind. You can be very focused on conversations, and your mind's not wandering off to la la land, so to speak. But where you see that occurring, because you will see that as you're training your mind to get to enlightenment, you will see that your mind is daydreaming. You will see that it is hard for you to put words together. You will see that when you are listening or having conversations, your mind will daydream. That's where you're practicing breathing mindfulness meditation to be able to cut off and let go. So that when you're in conversation and you see the mind going away from you, you can cut that off and bring it back to the conversation. And when you do this more and more, eventually the mind won't go away. Or when you see the mind daydreaming, you cut that off and let it go and come to the present moment and do something and train the mind to be satisfied and content in the present moment. Or if you see that you're having rambling speech, so to speak, and what you would like to do is gather your thoughts before you speak and then speak and deliver those thoughts, right? You would like to have conscious thoughts and deliver that through your speech. And as you get trained to do this more and more, your mind will just always do it. That meditation is so important. Without breathing mindfulness meditation, you wouldn't be able to do that because there's going to be craving in the mind. Your mind's not going to be exercised in the meditation to be able to focus and have concentration in daily life. So the combination of breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity is training the mind to get rid of craving, desire, attachment, so it's not longing and yearning. And then in the moment, you're practicing mindfulness or awareness of mind, and you're applying right effort so that where you observe with mindfulness that your mind isn't focused and concentrated, then you cut it off and bring the mind back. And then you'll get in this groove of more and more your mind is just able to practice that clear comprehension and that concentration because you're just always doing it that way. And be sure that you're practicing singleness of mind. If you are eating and watching TV at the same time, you're training your mind to rapidly cycle back and forth and back and forth. So now when you're in a conversation with somebody, your mind's going to have a hard time just focusing. Or if you are talking on the telephone and watching TV or eating or something like this, again, your mind's rapidly cycling. So all the work that you're doing in meditation comes to fruition in your daily life as you're talking on the phone. Just train the mind to talk on the phone. Or as you're watching TV, just watch TV. If you're eating, just eat. If you're writing an email, just write email. Don't have a YouTube video playing in the background. If you need to, pause the YouTube video and then write your email. Or something like this. You would like to just do one thing at a time so that the benefits that you're cultivating in meditation, that you're now supporting that and you're encouraging it in daily life through practicing singleness of mind. This is how you ensure that you're developing that concentration, and then you'll see it come into the mind more and more because you're exercising the mind in that way. If your mind's rapidly cycling or you find that it's muddled or lacking concentration, this is because you probably aren't necessarily meditating significantly enough and accumulated enough benefits there. And you're also not potentially practicing singleness of mind in daily life to then be able to cut off and let go and just do one thing at a time. But as you do these two things combined, along with practicing generosity, you'll find that your comprehension and your clarity and your concentration will arise, and then it'll be available to you more and more readily. By the time your mind gets to enlightenment, it'll just always be there. It'll be practicing concentration with ease. But when you first start, it's a struggle, it's a challenge, it's difficult to get the mind to that point. But if you stay dedicated, determined, and diligent, you'll be able to get the mind to that point where it's effortlessly practicing concentration at all times. Thank you for that question. I'm not seeing any questions in Zoom or on Facebook. So let's go to the last chapter of today, which is chapter 70. Here, the title is The First Jhana is Secure from Danger in Mara. So too, monks, when distant from sense desires, distant from unwholesome mental states, enters and resides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering, based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy. On that occasion, it occurs to the monk, now I am secure from danger, and Mara cannot do anything to me. It also occurs to Mara, the evil one, now the monk is secure against danger, and I cannot do anything to him. And the Buddha said the same thing in reference to the second, third, and fourth jhana. He just repeated these and explained that you're secure from Mara, the evil one. So let me explain what Mara, the evil one, is. This is the being that is interested in causing calamity in the world. That this being, it's a true being, it's a formless being, meaning there isn't physical form. This is the being that essentially is overseeing hell and also afflicted spirits. This being Mara is influencing those beings as well. And now Mara and these other beings are trying to influence you to do unwholesome things. It's still your choices whether you do something. Mara can't force you to do something. It's your choices. But Mara is going to try to influence you, and the beings working on Mara's behalf are going to try to influence you to do unwise things, to potentially gossip, to potentially slander, to have false speech, to kill, to steal, to have sexual misconduct, to lie, to take substances that cause heedlessness. All these things and others, they're going to try to influence you to do those things because your mind is lacking wisdom. It isn't protected. Your mind hasn't been trained enough. So these beings can potentially influence you to do these things. But if you make the choice to do them, it's your choice. They're not doing them for you. But by the time you've cultivated the mind and you've trained it with enough wisdom and you've gotten into this first jhana, what the Buddha is saying is, hey, Mara can't influence you anymore because you have enough wisdom at that point and you have enough training that Mara can't influence you to do unwholesome things. And Mara knows this too. So Mara is essentially going to back away and go try to affect other beings. So if you're interested in getting to this enlightened mental state, your mind's going to need to move through the 4 jhanas. These are preliminary phases that the mind is experiencing at all times throughout your day. And then ultimately you move into the first stage of enlightenment and beyond. So as your mind moves to this first jhana, you can rest assured that your mind is now secure. This can be one of the motivations or encouragements to get to this enlightened mental state and to move through the actual jhana so you're not influenced by Mara any longer. Some traditions refer to Mara maybe as the devil or Satan or Lucifer or something like this. It's a real being that exists. You may or may not have ever seen this being. You may or may not even have realized that they're trying to influence you, but this being is there always trying to influence you until you get to that first jhana, because at that point you've cultivated enough wisdom and your mind has enough training that it won't be influenced by Mara. And Mara knows this, so Mara's not going to waste their time. They're just going to move on to other beings. Let me know what questions you guys have about this chapter. Again, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom if you like. Okay, it looks like we have something coming in here on YouTube. Hello, teacher. I have a question, maybe not exactly related. I was curious about how to meditate without always trying to check how much time I have left. Let's say I'm going to meditate for 25 or 30 minutes. How would I know how long I'm meditating for if I don't use a clock or timer? Okay, so what I suggest you do is not to use an alarm or a timer, because that's something you need to set up prior to meditation, and you don't necessarily know how long you're going to meditate for. That's like trying to determine the future. And when you set the clock, your mind's going to be sitting there in meditation wondering, is it time yet? Is it time yet? Is it time yet? That's what you're describing, I think, which is the craving, desire, attachment. You're trying to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, but when you set this alarm, it's like trying to determine the future, and now the mind is longing and yearning, so you're going to find it difficult to meditate when you set an alarm or a timer. Now, occasionally you might need to set an alarm or a timer, like if you're on your way to work or something like that, or you only have a certain amount of time. But the vast majority of the time, maybe in the evenings or the weekends, the way that you do this is only once a week. You look at the clock before you start meditation, then you meditate. No timer, no nothing. You just look at the clock. Oh, it's 10 a.m. Okay, you start meditating. And then when you're done, when you feel like you're done, you just stop and you look and you're like, oh, it's 10:45. I've been meditating for 45 minutes. Excellent. I'm up to that 25 or 30 minute threshold. I'm into 45 minutes, or I'm short of it. And now you kind of have a check-in about once a week, check in, because you could see that this gradual improvement to the training that you're elongating your time more and more. So you're not interested in setting an alarm most times, but you will need to check the time before and after, but just do it about once a week so your mind doesn't get attached to it, checking it every single time. Get in the habit of meditating without even knowing what time it is. Just start your meditation, and then when you're done, you're done. You don't even have to look at the clock before and after. Now, again, check in once a week and see that you've been meditating for a particular amount of time. So if in week 1 you meditated for 15 minutes, you notice in week 2 that you're starting to meditate about 18 or 20 minutes. So you know that you're improving. And then just once a week, kind of check in on that. So that's how you do it without an alarm, and ensure that you're continuing to grow up to the 25 or 30 minutes of meditation. Let's see if we have any other questions coming in. I don't see any, so that means you guys must be getting what you need. All right, so I'm just going to end class today by thanking you guys for joining. Thank you for your wonderful questions, and invite you to attend one of the future classes. Next week in the Pali Canon and English study group, we're going to be in chapters 71 through 80. So if you'd like to read those ahead of time, you surely can. You can download these books by going to buddhadailywisdom.com, clicking on the link for free books. And from there, you can download volume 3 and start reading from chapter 71 to 80, about 15-20 minutes a day. And that'll get you through all the 10 chapters. And you'll have time to read and reflect on those, and then come to class with a bit of questions that you might have where you're seeking clarification and understanding of the teachings. Tomorrow in the group learning program, we're going to be in volume 1, chapter 10, which is titled, What is Merit? This is a unique type of Kama that you're going to need to understand in order to actually get to enlightenment. So you would need to understand what merit is and then understand how to practice it. So I'm going to be sharing that with you. Then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation. This is a time for us to come together to encourage, support, and motivate each other in our meditation practice. And you're welcome to join for the Wednesday classes, because not only do we meditate, but I open up to any and all questions that you guys might be interested to ask related to the path to enlightenment and developing your practice. So we'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Sawadee-ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.